Good afternoon and welcome back to today's WISE event. A special word of welcome to Her Highness Sheikha Moza bint Nasser and to Her Excellency Sheikha Hind bint Hamad Al Thani. It just feels like, please. It's hard to believe that we've come to the end of the WISE Summit. It really does feel like I was here just a few moments ago launching the entire event. We hope that over the past 2 days you've met new people, shared inspiring ideas, and that these will lead to future opportunities and networking. And really, this is the power of WISE, that you come together and it leads to all sorts of different educational opportunities. Before we delve into this session, a word of thanks once again to our partners who have made all of this possible. Our sponsors, Banco Santander, the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy, EY Parthenon, and ExxonMobil. Our summit and program partners and research organizations. And finally, our media partners. And of course, as the conversation continues this afternoon, don't forget the hashtags for our sessions to tweet your comments and opinions. Now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to invite this year's WISE Prize for Education laureate on stage. Yesterday we heard a little about his journey, but we'll have him come up and tell us a little bit more. He's the founder of the Ashesi University College, which really has become one of the top universities in Ghana in less than 10 years. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Patrick Awa.
Your Highness, Your Excellency, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is such an honor to be on this stage this afternoon. As I was heading to WISE 2017, I stumbled across an interesting poll on the summit website. And the poll asked, what do you consider to be the most important skill for today's world? There were 4 skills listed: complex problem solving, social and emotional intelligence, critical thinking, and creativity. 41% of respondents indicated that social and emotional intelligence is the most important skill for the world today. The truth is, all of these matter. The ability to cooperate with others, the ability to respect the beliefs of others, the ability to navigate complex opinions and ideas are all necessary to move any society forward. My journey over the last 15 years has been about helping spread this ethos through my work at Ashesi University. When I was completing high school in the early 1980s, a bright-eyed 19-year-old, I wanted nothing more than to be an astronaut. I read a lot of science fiction novels. I marveled at the NASA Space Shuttle program. The idea of exploring space fascinated and intrigued me. And I decided to apply to college in the United States to study engineering. It turns out, when I was applying to college, my family was desperate to get me out of Ghana. A military coup had brought our country's economy to a standstill. There was a lot of uncertainty about the country's future. Businesses closed. Severe food shortages spread all over the country. Inflation officially reached 100%. And the typical shop in Ghana consisted of empty shelves. Thankfully, I was accepted into Swarthmore College with a full scholarship to study engineering. And so it is that I arrived in the United States with $50 in my pocket and a head full of dreams. The education that I experienced at Swarthmore was different from anything I'd experienced before. Growing up in Ghana, my education had been built around rote learning. Questioning teachers could lead to serious trouble. And our curriculum was designed to educate people who would be good at following instructions. Swarthmore was the complete opposite. Our classes focused on teaching us how to ask the right questions, not what to think. We studied broadly. We learned to break down complex problems and to see problems from different perspectives. We pondered our responsibility as citizens of the world. And my multidisciplinary education in engineering at Swarthmore prepared me very well for Microsoft, where I went to work after I graduated. 1 year after I started at Microsoft, I would return to Ghana for the first time since leaving, and I was disillusioned by what I found. We still had a military government. The water ran 2 hours a day where my family lived, from midnight to 2 a.m. The telephones did not work, and so businesses sent messages by couriers traveling on motorcycles through the capital. This was a stark contrast from my new life in Seattle and at Microsoft. So I returned to the United States and I said to myself, I will never return to Ghana. I would never move back home. 5 years later, my son was born, and everything changed. Our son, our own. His birth changed the way I see the world. So as a father of an African child, I wondered, how would he see himself growing up? What would Africa mean to him? And this is really where my reset happened. I realized I didn't have the power to disown a continent. And so I started to think through what it would mean to move back. There are two questions in my mind. Why was Africa so restrained in its ability to move forward? And what was the most impactful thing that I could do to help speed up progress? I spent time speaking with friends and family back home in Ghana, trying to gain perspective, what the challenges were. And repeatedly, one word stood out: leadership. Across multiple challenges, it didn't matter whatever challenge we were talking about, leadership stood out as the root of what was holding us back. It was clear that the people who had the ability to influence or drive change were either simply maintaining the status quo or too focused on self-interest to act for the benefit of the larger society. And when I looked at the people in positions of influence, they all had one thing in common: a tertiary education. I also learned that less than 5% of college-age students in Ghana and in Africa attended college. That number has risen slightly since then. So almost by definition, sitting in any college classroom in Africa are the people most likely to be making decisions that will affect the trajectory of their generation and Africa's future. And so I decided, this is my answer. If there's one thing I could do, the most impactful thing would be higher education. So one morning I wake up and I ask my wife, what would you say if I said, I'm going to quit Microsoft today. Let's go to Ghana. Let's go educate leaders. And she immediately said, yes, let's do it. So I sit up in bed and I ask, wait, don't you think we should even just think about this a little bit? And I was so surprised. And it took me, I was the one who held us back. It took me a year after I had her full permission to leave. I eventually quit my job and we started to work to establish a chassis for someone who had once aspired to be an astronaut. Those early experiences brought me quickly back down to earth. It was difficult. We hadn't anticipated the difficulty of navigating the accreditation process in Ghana. We hadn't anticipated the difficulty of fundraising. But Ashesi's founding team was resilient. Instead of postponing our launch to focus on raising money for our campus, we put our personal savings behind the university and we launched in a rented home in Ghana's capital city of Accra, with bedrooms and living rooms converted to classrooms. In 2002, we opened our doors to 30 students. Our first instructors came in as visiting faculty and volunteers from Microsoft and from universities in the United States and the United Kingdom. Some of our pioneer students quit in those first few weeks and left for other institutions, unsure whether Ashesi was the right fit for them, or frankly, whether Ashesi would last. But most of that class stayed, determined to work with us to build this university. They considered the university their own, and they spent time building the student culture and working with us to improve the curriculum. It was inspiring to watch them tackle difficult problems inside and outside the classrooms. From that first class of 30, today, Ashesi has nearly 900 students and on track to have 1,000. On track to have 1,000 students enrolled by the end of next year. Half of our students are women. Half of our students receive scholarships from the university. There are 25 countries represented on our campus. We founded Ashesi University with an intentional mission to educate ethical entrepreneurial leaders. The spirit of curiosity, the willingness to do the right thing even when no one is watching over them, the concern for the well-being of others, and the courage to take on difficult but important tasks. It is these skills and values that we believed would make the next generation great leaders. It is these skills and values that we have continued to nurture within our students. Our over 1,000 alumni are working in high-impact careers on the continent and around the world. 90% of them are staying on the continent. Nearly all our graduates receive job offers, start a business, or enroll in a graduate school within 6 months of graduating. And the feedback from the people they work with is phenomenal. Employers are impressed with their ability to tackle complex problems, their ability to deal with ambiguity, and their integrity. As Ashesi students graduate from Ashesi, we watch them head out into the world full of hope that they will overcome the hurdles in their way. And many of the stories I hear every day about what they're accomplishing inspire me. I am not an astronaut, but there are days when I feel like I'm among the stars. Here are some examples. Alumna Regina Konu, who was named on BBC's list of 100 most inspirational and innovative women in 2017 for her work bringing computer science education to more women in Africa. Claude, Henry, Derry Dean, and Charles, who started a tech business, Dream Oval, in Ashesi's computer labs. Today, they serve over 5 million customers through their tools. They're valued at over $10 million and are providing jobs for over 100 people. Or Petemeni, who built and launched technology tools to help fight against the spread of Ebola in West Africa, and who is now helping rebuild his home country of Liberia. These stories and achievements remind me that the work that we do as educators is about making the world a more hopeful place for generations that come after us. We're in the hope business. Our job is to help the next generation look beyond present challenges to a brighter future that they're equipped to create. Ashesi is just at the beginning of its journey. This mission to help transform a continent. As we move forward, we will be engaged more fully in the question of how to achieve systematic change by working with other universities on the continent. We will also redouble our efforts, working with our students and graduates who will carry our mission and implement it through their work. The theme for this year's WISE Summit, Coexist, Co-Create, Learning to Live and Work Together, is more important than ever. As we confront a new set of storms in the world, we must remain steadfast in our task of bringing hope to the next generations. The WISE Prize symbolizes the hope I speak of. It is recognition of our work as educators, and I consider it such an honor to join the remarkable group of WISE Prize laureates. I'm so grateful to Your Excellency for leading the establishment of this prize. I also thank the jury and committee members who have given such recognition to the work we do at Ashesi University. And I'm grateful to all of you here today for the collective force for good that you represent in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to ask you to stay so that the audience can ask you some questions about your remarkable story. So if you join me on the soft sofa. It truly is an extraordinary story, very, very inspiring. I'd like to open it up now to the floor so that you get the opportunity to ask Patrick more about his story and anything else that you want to ask. So I'll take number 7 and number 3. We'll begin with number 7.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the great speech. It's showing great success. From where the story starts, how did you decide to leave the fantastic life and start from the scratch? What motivates you?
Okay, and I'll take number 3 and we'll come back to you.
Hi, I'm Faris and I'm a high school student, senior high school student. And my question is, as students who are almost going to the next step, which is in university, how can we bridge the gap between the knowledge economy and the knowledge society with all these fantastic technology tools that we have that can empower such as like a student like us to contribute meaningfully and even create knowledgeable societies, because as we know, us, the youth, we are drowning a bit in these tools. So I hope you understand my question. Thank you.
Okay. So, great.
All right, so the first question was why I left Microsoft. You know, the day came when I realized that if I didn't take a stand and if I didn't return to try, that I might look back and regret not having tried. And, you know, when I was at the company, you know, we were very focused on changing the world through software. And my son is born, and I start to worry about Africa, and there was some really awful news coming out of Africa with Somalia and Rwanda, Liberia, Sierra Leone. And it seemed that those stories needed to change. I'm changing the world through the design and construction of software to, wait, this is just software. Changing the world has got to be about thinking about Africa. And so I decided I really needed to go try to do that. The question about how do students move from, I think it was about from a knowledge society to a knowledge economy. We are in a world, I think that knowledge economy is a bit of a misnomer. We're in a world now where we're in a learning economy. So knowledge is changing, technology is changing, and it's all moving very quickly. And so the most important thing for a young person is to learn how to learn and to be motivated to continue to learn for the rest of your life. I think that the university of the future, the schools of the future, will not be entities that educate people for 4 years and then they're done. And then they come back for 2 years to get a master's and then they're done. They're going to be educating people throughout their careers. And so that 4-year period is a transition period of learning how to learn and getting you started in a career. But then as you move on in your career, you're going to be constantly be learning every week, every month, every year. You're going to be sort of engaged with some organization that is about education, and you're going to be engaged with your colleagues and learning throughout your life.
Great. I'll take a few more. So we've got number 6 and number 5.
Hello, I'm Olga, I'm from Russia, and I would like to ask you a very simple and very difficult question. What do you think? Do all children have a desire to learn? Or there are a lot of children who hate learning at all, who are lazy persons? Thank you.
Okay, and then I believe there was one here.
Thank you very much. My name is B.M. Flomopiwe, and I come from Liberia, and I am a Wise Learner Voice Fellow. My question is, what is that one thing that you can say to us as young people who are very passionate about changing the status quo of education in our country, given the radical posture of our government in terms of transforming education for every young person?
Thank you.
What was the question? What's the one thing to do?
What's the one thing to do to change the status quo of education in our countries?
Okay.
So the first one was about lazy children.
Actually, you said it's a simple but difficult question. I don't think it's so difficult. I haven't really met a child who doesn't want to learn. But I have met children who have been switched off learning. And I want to just share my own personal story. The first school I remember going to in Accra, I was there for just one term. And I hated that school. And I was the bottom of my class because the teacher hit us all the time if you made a mistake. And when my parents moved my cousin and I out of that school to another school, which is a very different environment, I was suddenly at the top of the class. And I always remained, you know, one of the top 3 students in my class the whole time I was in school. But you wouldn't have guessed that from my first term at that one school when I was bottom of the class, just because the environment was just so awful, right? And I think as educators who are working in education or policymakers, we need to approach children with this understanding that they're all curious, they all want to learn, and we need to create that environment for them to do so.
And the second question was changing the status quo of education in the countries.
Do what I did. Start something new. And don't do it by yourself. Find a small group of people to join you and start taking the steps. But you have to prepare yourself. You have to think of it. If you're going to climb Mount Everest, what would you do? You would find a buddy. You would train for it. You would read about it. You would gather the resources. And when you're ready, you would go to the mountain and find a Sherpa to guide you up. And you have to take the same approach in whatever endeavor that you want to take on, is find that group of people that are going to work with you to make it happen.
We can take another round of questions. So I'll take number 2, please, and 4.
Yes, hello. My name is Masa Mufti. I'm Syrian. Patrick, this is extremely inspiring for people coming from Syria. If I were to ask you one question or one advice for Syrian people who want to go back to Syria one day and to rebuild their country, universities, schools, name it, how can we face all the challenges that we know that we will be facing? What made you survive and make it through? Just give me the best tips. Thank you.
Thank you. And we had a question just down here.
Dr. Patrick, congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm proud of you because I come from the same continent like you. I have a similar story like yours, but it's been very difficult for me to kickstart. I was a high school teacher until when I enrolled for a PhD in 2010. The reason why I enrolled for a PhD was because I wanted to own an institution of higher learning of my own. I had my PhD in 2013, and this is 2017. I've still not started. So when I listen to your story, it's very inspiring. I'm participating in this conference. There are many things that came into my mind. We're looking at the future. Technology is apparently going to be a big disruption of what is happening at the moment. If you were to advise me, given that I have not yet started, and technology seems to be a threat to brick and mortar classrooms, what will you be advising me? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So the first question was about returning to Syria and rebuilding schools, the best advice.
Well, the best advice that I know, I would say that my ability to return to Ghana was dependent on a number of things, but the most important is relationships. So I have nurtured very strong relationships when I was working at Microsoft, when I was in college, when I went to business school. Everywhere I go, I have been able to connect with people in a deep way. People who've trusted me and who've wanted to help me. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. And I think that when you proceed in life with this sort of openness to other people and really connecting with other people, it's a very powerful thing. The second is maintaining relationships. It's relationships again in Syria. And the third, I would say, you have to brace yourself. The people who struggle when they've returned to Ghana, and I know a few people who've come to Ghana and they leave within 2 years. The people who struggle the most are the people who don't come in with the understanding to build a nation is a struggle. You should expect that it'll be difficult. And you should expect that if you work through that difficulty, you will eventually be successful. But if you go in thinking everyone is going to embrace you warmly and life is going to be easy and so on, then you're not going to make it. In my case, I also have the ability. So, for example, I could shield myself in Ghana from things like power fluctuations and this sort of thing. What I've chosen to do is I shield my students. So on our campus, if there's a power outage, we'll automatically switch to generators and there'll be power. And we've installed solar. At home, I could do the same. I have the ability to do that. But my wife and I decided we would just install a very small solar panel, so when the power went out, we just had a few lights on at home. So we could feel what everybody else is feeling. And this sort of keeps me grounded. And so that's my advice. You've just got to have some grit. Now, there's a question about bricks and mortar versus, technology. Online technology and online learning, I don't think is going to replace brick and mortar. I think it's going to complement bricks and mortar. If you want to educate doctors, they're going to be in a facility where they're dealing with other human beings. If you're going to educate engineers, they're going to build things. They'll be in a lab. They'll be dealing with materials. If you look at some of the biggest universities in the world, including Stanford and Harvard and MIT, which have major online massively online courses going on. They're also making massive bets in bricks and mortar. Harvard has just announced that they're building a $400 million engineering facility. So my advice is don't think about it as an either or. It's going to be both. If you're engaged in the project that I'm engaged in, educating ethical leaders and teaching people to be able to connect across cultures, and so on, you need to bring them together. People have to deal with people, and I don't think we can have everyone all just looking in their screens all the time. They'll do some of that, but it's not going to be a replacement. That's my personal opinion.
We'll take a final round of questions. Number 8, just there, and 1.
Great. Okay.
Hi, Patrick. Where are you taking Ashesi next?
Okay.
Okay, and number 1.
Thank you. I am Mohammed Al-Mohannadi. I'm the CEO of a company called Social Media Solutions. So I'm in the digital communication business. As well, I'm considered as a social entrepreneur in Qatar, creating social enterprises and thinking about gaps and needs in the communities. And I was one of the learners' voice in 2010. So I'm proud now, after 7 years, that I'm standing here speaking and expressing something. I have one question. Me, myself, didn't continue education. I dropped out from university, and I decided to live my life purpose, try to fill up gaps in social communities. And then I found out that the urge of having proper education is always of a need. But the opportunity after you live your years and then people asking you to go back into education, it became a much difficult task with all the commitments that you're going through. Especially that I want to continue in Northwestern University because this is the field that I want to pursue in. How do you look into this? What is the right recommendations and suggestions for a person who have been being out of the education system, have lived through a life process, and then he thought of that he's in a block. How can he get back? How can he get back into track? And put educational elements as one of the educational or one of the elements in his life, let's say, future, and with all the commitments that it's already been existing.
Sure, thank you. Thank you. If you can respond to that question first, and then we'll go to the...
All right, okay. So, you know, I talked about earlier in response to one of the questions that I think that education is going to be something that people do for the rest of their lives. And I think for working professionals, the ability to take short courses at universities, the ability to take online courses, which allow you to study while you're working and dealing with all the other, you know, responsibilities that you have, is a fantastic way to continue to educate yourself. I myself, you know, and also just reading, right? I read a lot. I've recently signed up with someone to be a, sort of an executive coach. That's sort of going back to school. It's different. We're doing it through Skype and so on. So that's what my advice will be for somebody who is already a professional, who's already running a business, and you know, a grade in a course or a certificate is not necessarily all that important. It's more your performance that matters. And so taking those courses online or in a classroom that enables you to do your work better would be the way to go.
And where do you plan on taking Ashesi next?
So next for Ashesi is two things. One is that we need to continue to grow our organization and to really double down on driving innovation to be coming out of our university. And so there's work that we're doing. You know, our first 10 years was really focusing on ethics, and then we're going to continue that. Now, moving forward, we really want to see more companies starting out of our alumni body. And because jobs are so important, we want to see more new technology coming out of our institution. And so we're making some important investments in this area. The second thing, which I think is incredibly important, is that we have to start to think about systematic change. And how do you achieve scale? You achieve scale by the work of governments and the market, right? So we have to engage with the government, with public universities, with other private universities, not only in Ghana, but across the continent, and find a way for us to collaborate with each other in a way that strengthens all universities. And that kind of systems change, or movement, if you will, is incredibly important in Africa today. When I think about, we asked ourselves a question recently: what is Africa going to look like 50 years from now? You know, the first answer is, well, do we even know what it's going to look like 10 years from now? What is the world going to look like 10 years from now? Well, we know, for example, that by 2050, which is less than 50 years from now, the population of Africa is going to double from what it is today. This is a tremendous challenge, but also an incredible opportunity. We know that we're going to have to create a lot of jobs. We know that we're going to have to build a lot of infrastructure. We're going to have to build a lot of schools. We're going to have to... Most of what needs to be created in Africa has not yet been created. We know that science and technologies, whatever the world is going to look like, science and technology is going to play an important role. And we also know that the world is getting smaller. We're getting more closely connected. And so the ability for people to navigate cultures and to work with people across cultures is going to be important. So somehow, the systems work that we do, the systematic change what we're doing, needs to get all universities to focus on this idea that we need to be training people, educating people who can create jobs. We need to double down on technology and engineering. We need to soften the borders between our countries, or maybe even remove the borders, because that ability to trade is going to be so important in the future. And this is what we're going to be focusing on.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Patrick, and congratulations again, ladies and gentlemen. Please congratulate.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Well done. So, ladies and gentlemen, over the last couple of days, we've spoken a lot about learning to learn, and there are things that we've just discussed now, coexisting in our changing world and co-creating knowledge societies. And these are really things that our next two speakers have adopted in their everyday life and their work. So if you could please welcome on stage the award-winning novelist, Ms. Chimamanda Adichie, and Stavros Yanuka, the CEO of WISE, for the next session. So first of all, how remarkable is Patrick? Can I just say, I'd like to...
He is beyond remarkable. And can I just say that I feel a particular sense of pride because he's my brother. He's my West African brother.
Of course, and we've got another brilliant African here on the stage. I mean, you often speak about the complexities of people, and that every single person has a different story. And I suppose in many ways, we've spoken a lot in the last few days about how the education system needs to change to fit into the fact that people are learning in different ways. And Patrick's touched on that as well. So if you could just tell us a little bit more about, you speak about how complex people are and how they learn in different ways.
I've also found myself thinking a lot about education because I have a baby. Well, she's 2, so she's maybe not so much of a baby now, and thinking about how important it is for me that she learns as she plays. And so it kind of makes me think about how learning should be fun, but also how it shouldn't always be fun. How we should make room, maybe 20% of learning shouldn't be fun. And I say this as somebody who completely hated mathematics when I was in secondary school. And had I been given the choice, I would not have taken mathematics. But I'm happy that I was made to take it because it helps me be able to calculate my change when I go to the market. but really, just in a larger, and I think it's important that we think of education in a very broad sense and that we acknowledge the diversity of people. And I say this as a person who was educated in Nigeria, primary school and secondary school, started studying medicine in Nigeria, and then left to go to the US because I didn't want to become a doctor. And looking back now, I wish that I had been allowed to, for example, take classes in what was known as the arts. And so it was a very rigid system. There was the sciences and then the arts. And if you did well in school, you went to the sciences. And there was an ever so slight tinge of about the arts that they were somehow less than, that it was what people did who weren't very bright. And I think that's such a dangerous thing because it limits students. I was very much interested in history and in literature, and I wanted to take classes in music and history, and I couldn't. Because they said, you're bright, so you go to the sciences. And so I wish that education, that the systems would be more flexible, that they acknowledge that it is in fact possible to like chemistry and music. So that's kind of that's my dream for education systems across the continent of Africa.
Stavros, is there room now for change? Because a lot of educational institutes are very rigid and, Chimamanda just spoke about needing flexibility in that.
Well, I absolutely agree, and I think there's tremendous room for change. I mean, WISE is predicated on change. That's why we have innovation in our DNA, in our title. And if you look around the WISE community, you see many examples of people trying to do things differently. Over the last 2 days, people may have come across Ben Nelson and the Minerva School, or Minerva University, I should say, which is reimagining how you do higher education without a campus. Minerva, for those who don't know, has established itself as a liberal arts university without a campus. It just moves students from across 6 or 7 different cities, and they use the city as the classroom. They have faculty, they use the technology to connect. There's a cohort, they use the city as the classroom. Patrick is doing incredible stuff. I think, Patrick's premise, if I may, was why not have a top liberal arts college in Africa? I mean, the number of people over the years that I've heard that have said to me, oh, well, that's Harvard and we can't do Harvard here because we're in country X. I think Patrick's example is, well, no, you can. You just have to have the vision, the grit to try it and do it.
Sebastian Thrun said yesterday that we're nowhere ready for the kind of skills that we need and that's required at the pace at which technology is moving. Do you think that enough is being done to equip people in terms of their skills?
Well, I mean, I think there's work. Clearly, there's work to be done. Personally, I don't 100% buy the skills gap story. I think to a certain extent, it's companies wanting to shift the responsibility onto the public education system to train people for work. Well, they should be doing, quite frankly, some of that and a lot of that. Education has to be more than just about skills and jobs. I mean, I appreciate Patrick's call to arms to say, well, yeah, we need to educate entrepreneurs. And I agree, but if you look at the education of top entrepreneurs, a lot of them are educated in the arts. A lot of them are educated in creative activities. A lot of them have a sort of a moral compass, an ethical compass. And I think that we need to get back to that holistic view of education, which is not just about, jobs.
Chimamanda, you work with a lot of aspiring young writers. How do you help them reach their full potential?
I just want to add to what, which is to say that I couldn't agree more, that I think it really is important to think about education as not just learning skills, but learning such things as citizenship, and even more importantly, empathy. And I think one way to do that is to make sure that literature is an essential part of education. I think literature teaches you empathy. Literature forces empathy on you. Literature makes you think about living in somebody else's skin. And if one is able to do that, I think, then we're more able to live peacefully with one another. We're more able to understand that people are different and that it's okay. I think that's what the storytelling for me is such an essential part of what it means to be educated. I often joke about how I really didn't want to go to school. I just wanted to stay home and read books. And I think I might have been better off if I'd been allowed to do that. But I teach workshops in Nigeria, and I started it about 10 years ago because I had the good fortune to be published, and I knew that there was a lot of talent in Nigeria, not so much opportunity. I knew that there were young people who wanted to write, and I knew that mine was a society that didn't necessarily think of writing as something that was aspirational. And so I started this workshop to bring people together who cared about the same things and to say to them, it's not strange to want to read and write. And I think there's something that's quite beautiful about knowing that you're not alone and knowing that somebody else has done what you want to do. And so for me, that was why I started the workshop. It's grown, and we have so many applications now. I had wanted it to be focused on Nigeria, but to be Pan-African. Now we have applications from all over the world. And it's still mostly Nigerian, kind of getting Pan-African. But for me, at the core, it's about helping young writers to know that they can write and to find their voices, whatever their voices are. And I'm also hoping that it becomes sort of a stepping stone for greater diversity in African literature. So we have people who are interested in fantasy and science fiction and creative nonfiction and all of those things. And it's incredible to me the amount of talent there is. The people who come to that workshop and they write a piece, and I am just completely blown away. And what happens after the workshop is that there is a community that's created of people who continue to support one another. And so now and I think what happens is that it feeds itself. So they send each other their work, they critique each other, and they've gone on to do things. Some of them have published books, they're in writing programs, and it's, for me, something that I feel very excited about. And I also learn. I mean, what I love about teaching is that I learn as I teach.
You've touched a few times about this kind of cultural attitude towards writing and literature. Is that starting to shift, though, now? Are you starting to see a change where, parents are okay to support their children who don't want to be engineers or doctors, they want to be writers?
Not as much as I would like. I mean, I suppose there is a slight shift, but I wish there was more. I think there's a shift when it comes to maybe music in Nigeria, and I think that's because Nigerian parents have seen that musicians actually earn money. So it's shifting a little bit with writing, but not as much as. But also, I think it's fair to be fair to the parents. It's not so much about killing their children's dreams as it is about realizing that their children have to earn a living, and Nigeria is still a country where you can't really earn your living from writing, at least not writing literature. So you would need to teach or have some sort of backup, which is also okay, I think.
Stavros, in the last 2 days, we've spoken a lot about fact and truth. And really, this is the basis of education. Are you worried that it's now being rattled because of this post-truth world that we're living in?
Well, if I can just piggyback a little bit on what Chimamanda was saying, and Sir Michael Barber, who was here yesterday, he said something interesting during a lunch with Her Highness, that he says, the debate on education is plagued by false dichotomies, meaning that it really isn't about skills versus knowledge, or arts versus science. It really should be about both. And at the core, I think we need scientists who are sensitized to the humanities, and we need humanities scholars who are scientifically literate. So it's not an either or. In terms of the post-truth issue, I see it more as a call to arms. I think let's not spend any more time navel-gazing and asking ourselves, oh, how did we get here? Let's focus instead on what we need to do going forward. And I think if we assert the ethical values on which a good education is founded, then I think we're going to be all right. Key value is respect for the substantiated truth, the primacy of fact over opinion. But it also is about acknowledging that the search for the truth often involves competing ideas. And the best way that we resolve that competition of ideas is through reasoned discourse and through listening to each other.
I'm curious, Chimamanda, because we are now grappling with this whole idea of a post-truth world, and fact is no longer fact, or how we view it. Actually, you can come up with your own facts. Is this something that you grapple with your young students as well?
No, not really. Because I think that might be something that is particular to a particular set of people in a particular country who talk about alternative facts. I think, but I think maybe the larger point really is how to talk about what's happening, and I'm not as I love that about navel gazing. So I'm not as interested in the navel gazing and how do we get there. I think just to teach young people that they should. I think in general, whether or not we're in the post-truth world, that it's a good thing to have a certain kind of healthy skepticism about things, and not to be gullible. And I think particularly now in the sort of the age of social media, that I think education should include a certain kind of literacy in social media. Because social media is not all bad, right? Well, debatably. But really, so my parents have recently become WhatsApp users. My father is 85, my mother is 75. And they have recently become WhatsApp users and email users on their phones. And it's delightful to watch because they're still trying to figure out what things are. But what I found was that they believe everything that they see. And so when you're sort of sending an email or you're online looking at something and there's one of those ads that says, click here, you have won $1,000. My parents are often quite marveled by this. And they think, really? Now let's see what that's about. And they click. And I realized that they come from a generation that isn't literate about these things and also come from a generation that expects a certain kind of ethical approach, and so they don't understand why anybody would put that in if it wasn't true. and so I think having a certain kind of skepticism, questioning, just teaching young people to ask questions. And also, I mean, fact over opinion, yes, but I think to blend both, to say to them, it's very important to be able to forge opinions, but those opinions need to be based on the foundation of fact and truth, right? You don't pull an opinion out of the air and say, well, it's my opinion. You have to be able to reason it out. And that idea of sort of intellectual rigor, even when you're giving an opinion, I think those are important skills to teach people. And I say this again, it really doesn't matter to me that there's a country where there's a leader who doesn't seem to know that fact is fact.
Stavros, we've just talked there about having literacy when it comes to using social media, but actually a lot of studies have found that young people are not literate when it comes to these things, whether they're, highly educated or not.
No, that's right, and I think one of the biggest problems we have is that we have sort of been persuaded by the high-tech industry, dare I say, that technology is neutral, that the platforms, the social media platforms, the search engines are neutral, and I think that is an alternative fact, shall we say? They're not neutral. Their ethical choices are being made in the design of these technologies, or they're not being made. Perhaps the choices are not being made, and for example, when a search engine gives a hierarchy of results based not on what is objectively speaking most valuable to you to answer your question, but based on what it thinks you want to hear or want to read. That's a choice that's being made, and it's being made by the algorithm. Similarly with our Facebook feeds, when Facebook pumps information based on, again, what it thinks we want to see, not on what may objectively be or not be useful. That's, again, a design choice that's being made. I'm not suggesting here that there's anything sinister going on in terms of these choices, but I think people design these things to sell to us, fundamentally. And then those engines are now being used to promote, quite frankly, bad ideas. And I think we need to not just educate ourselves, we definitely have to do that, but I think we need to demand of our tech giants to take on some editorial responsibility. I'm not advocating here for control of information or censorship, but I think they need to exercise editorial responsibility in the same way that a quality newspaper and a quality channel has to exercise editorial responsibility, because they're not neutral.
Indeed.
I mean, one thing would be, for example, for newspaper websites to stop doing the recommended for you. So if you've read 2 stories about gun violence, the next time you go on there, they recommend 7 stories about gun violence. And I'm thinking, I actually want to read other things. And I think that this age of the targeted ad, the targeted news article, it limits us. And there's a sense in which it's a wonderful thing to open a newspaper and read a story that you might not have read, because it widens your perspective. And I think that what's happening in this age of social media, although we talk a lot about social media connecting us, and actually I worry that it's limiting us, that we're all, sometimes without even knowing it, we are retreating into our own little safe spaces where we read only the things we want to read. And that, in terms of education, is not necessarily a good thing.
Well, on that note, I will open up the floor again to questions. So we've got number 4, 1, and 2. So number 4, please.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Riaz. I'm from Next Generation. My question is a little different. I'm attending this WISE conference for 5 years now, and we are talking about quality education, learning for underprivileged. And I'm thinking, for those who are well educated, well privileged, and they are on leadership role, and they are just busy in distracting this world, what do we do about it?
No, did I? And number 1, please.
Hi, my name is Maimouna. I'm young.
Could you stand up, please?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
My name is Maimouna, and I'm on the WISE Young Learners Program. I am so thrilled that Chimamanda is here. I'm a huge fan of your work. Ever since I've been young, I've found it difficult to relate to a lot of mainstream literature. And for the first time, we have somebody talking about race, representation, identity, and I applaud the WISE community for bringing you here. We always talk about technology and science progressing education and how important technology and science are for the future generations. But in honor of Chimamanda being here, I want to suggest that perhaps we also need arts and literature to heal. I say that because I did my master's on ISIS and extremism, and I would love to hear your thoughts and suggestions on how to regain a generation of young Muslims in Britain, Asia, and Africa who have fallen prey to extremism and radicalization. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe it was number 2 that was the next question.
Hello. Good evening. We've been talking about digital education. So there's an OECD research which says that the access to education, digital education. So the way we use internet is very different, and it comes to a point where people, especially young people belonging to different classes, use internet very differently. For example, someone belonging to an upper middle class would use internet very differently, and someone belonging to a lower class would use internet very differently. So this was a very interesting OECD research. I wish to ask whether we can address this inequity in technology when it comes to education.
Thank you. So one of the questions was about how do you regain a generation that's lost? She had done her studies on young people joining ISIS. So I don't know if you had thoughts on that.
I wish I knew how. I wish I knew how. I do think it might not be the answer, but I think that there are a number of things that might help. And so for Muslims in Europe in particular, where Islam has really taken on the role of a maligned race. And I think that it might be helpful to think about making European Muslims feel that they are in fact a part of Europe. I think that when people feel, excluded, that it's easy to turn to something else, right? And I think it's true that many countries in Europe have, in subtle and not so subtle ways, made Muslims feel that they are not, in fact, a part of their community, of their societies. And I know I keep going back to reading, but I can't help it because I'm such a believer in the power of stories. I think maybe also it's not just education, it's the type of education. I mean, when we talk about education, I'm enthusiastic about education, but I'm also very interested in asking what type of education. I know many ostensibly educated people who I do not find interesting in the least bit. And I know people who are not conventionally educated, who are in fact intellectually curious, wide readers. I also think that it matters what you're taught in school. It's not just that you're taught addition and subtraction. It's also, what are you taught to value? What are you taught about yourself? If you're growing up in a continent like Africa, you're taught, for example, that your history begins when the Europeans came. I remember in primary school being taught that the river Niger, which runs across the region of Nigeria from where I come, was discovered by a European called Mungo Park. And I think I was maybe 9 or 10, but even then I found this ridiculous. Because I remember thinking, surely my great-grandfather, you know, sort of fished in the river Niger before this person came. And so when you're told these stories about your own history and you internalize them, what really you're learning is to diminish yourself, to diminish the contribution of your own people to your own history. And you know, the reason that I find that very worrisome is that it affects everything. If you carry that worldview into the world, it affects the things that you think you can do and cannot do. Right? Because I think there's an emotional component to education. And so for me, it's a question of what are we teaching? What are we teaching kids? What are they internalizing? Right? There is a way, I think, to teach a certain kind of sense in which you are not a passive participant in your own story. You are an active participant. And I think the way that history is taught to many Africans still makes Africans passive. And I think it's dangerous. And it's not just Africa. I think this is true for Asia. I think this is true for the Middle East. I think this is true for Latin America. And I think it's important to change that. Because by changing that, we empower young people to feel confident enough to take on things. And I sort of want to tie this back to the idea of extremism, which is to say that you can educate people in a way to make them less likely to be gullible to extremism.
Great.
Again, if I can just come in here, I think we need to start making a distinction between schooling and education. So schooling is, you know, you've gone through the system, you've acquired a set of qualifications, you may or may not be able to do certain things, right? So let's take an example. You know, you've gone to a top business school and you've earned yourself an MBA. You're well schooled. But if you also believe that climate change is a hoax perpetrated by the Chinese, I would like to humbly suggest that maybe your education has some gaps in it.
On that note, can we please thank our remarkable speakers? Unfortunately, we've run out of time and we can't take any more questions, but please thank them for their contribution. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. So that really now brings to an end the WISE Summit, but if I can please ask Stavros to give us some closing remarks.
Thank you. Your Highness, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, we've now arrived at the close of WISE 2017. In what has been a challenging year, your presence here means a great deal to us. Thank you. And as I wrote to you back in June, it's a testament to the fact that Qatar remains very much open to the world. We've spent an exhilarating and inspiring couple of days together, discussing how education is the key to building a conscientious society that values knowledge, and not only keeps up with technology, but actually drives and shapes it ethically. As Her Highness said yesterday morning, and I'm not nearly as eloquent as she is, let us be inspired by this year's WISE theme of coexistence and place it at the core of solutions for different challenges, from issues of peace to stability and development. Let us return to education to reinforce this truth. As always, at the summit, we had the opportunity to engage with one another in solutions-based networking sessions. We had a new feature in the Majlis this year, where we harnessed our collective intelligence to map out our ideas for the future of schools. This is a question that is at the heart of Qatar Foundation's considerations today, so we thank you for your contributions. Now, many of you who participated are currently in school, and this is reflected in the diversity of insights and contributions, and I just want to share a couple of examples. The question was, what does a school that unlocks creativity look like? One answer we got was completely different from our school. I think we may have to revisit the question of whether we allow high schoolers into WISE, but I'll let that one slide. To the question, who are the teachers at a school that unlocks creativity? A more thoughtful answer this time was those who focus on talent and embrace failure. I think these answers and the hundreds more that we receive speak to the need for us to continue rethinking and reinventing education. And this is essentially the essence of what WISE is about. This year, we also took the summit beyond the walls of the QNCC. During what we call the Doha Learning Week, we partnered with 25 local and international organizations who between them hosted 40 events, from hackathons to film screenings to concerts for the entire community. And I want to thank all of those organizations that participated in Doha Learning Week. Our pre-summit program on November 14th included a day-long workshop at the Qatar Foundation headquarters, which brought together over 60 organizations to continue a conversation that began in April in Washington on ways to strengthen the global education ecosystem. We also hosted a workshop run by Qatar's Ministry of Education at the magnificent new Qatar National Library. Now, it's worth repeating that WISE may have begun life as a forum in 2009, but today it's much more than that. Our work rests on three pillars: research, programs, and advocacy. And increasingly, these pillars interconnect and reinforce each other. Earlier this morning, WISE launched the Agile Leaders of Learning Innovation Network, All In. What began as a capacity-building program then grew into a research agenda, and today we're ready to take the next step. We're ready to go all in and enable and empower a global network of school leaders. WISE is also, thank you. WISE is also contributing to the global policy agenda through its work with APEC on setting an education strategy for the Asia-Pacific region. Your Highness, you should know that WISE is one of 3 external advisors that APEC has invited on this work. The other 2 are the OECD and the World Bank. We're also working with the MasterCard Foundation to look at secondary education in Africa. Beyond research, in just 3 short years and with the generous support of Banco Santander, the WISE Accelerator has established itself as a small but nevertheless influential player in the education technology space. Participating projects have reported significant growth in both users and revenues. And while we have still much to learn in this space, going forward, we want to implement and provide targeted impact studies to support not only these new entrepreneurs to assess the effectiveness of their learning technologies, but also to gain new understanding and build new knowledge of this important space. So again, our programs are supporting our research, which in turn support our programs, and so on and so forth. And I'm pleased to announce that Banco Santander has agreed to renew its support to the WISE Accelerator for a further 3 years. So we thank them for that. I'm also pleased to announce that WISE will join forces with our sister organization, the World Innovation Summit for Health, WISH, to launch joint research and programs on well-being. And I do want to encourage all of you to watch out for the announcement of WISH 2018 in the coming weeks. I feel like I should be handing some sort of flag or Olympic flame now to Sultana, but none have been provided, unfortunately. Now, to continue advocating our advocacy work, to continue advocating for quality education as a means of individual empowerment and social transformation, WISE is launching a podcast, which we have very cleverly titled Wise Words, in which will feature in-depth conversations on education with leading public intellectuals, innovators, artists, and educators. The first episodes are already available on SoundCloud and will soon be available on iTunes as well. Now, finally, in the past 18 months, WISE took its message of hope to Tunis, Beijing, and Madrid. The success of these WISE at regional forums has prompted us to institutionalize this format. So I'm happy to let everyone know that in May 2018, we will team up with our outstanding and inspirational laureate to bring you WISE at Accra. But we're not going to stop there. In September, we will be in New York for WISE at the United Nations General Assembly. And in March, we will take WISE to Paris before returning to Doha, to our home, in November 2019 for WISE 2019. Your Highness, you've started something very special here. You have something very special here. Your work, your vision to build a future where quality education is a fundamental right available to all continues to inspire us. All of us at WISE feel privileged to be a part of this. Thank you.
Stavros, thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, Stavros. That brings us to an end of WISE 2017. The call for applications for the WISE 2018 award is now online on the WISE website. I'd like to thank you all for a wonderful 2 days. A special word of thanks to Her Highness Sheikha Moza bint Nasser. And for the rest of you, your buses and shuttles are waiting. They'll be there till 5:30. Thank you so much, and see you again at the next WISE.